Sweden. In the early 1990s, Sweden did something almost no other country has been willing to try. It handed parents a voucher. Not literally a piece of paper, but the principle is the same. Public money follows the child to whatever school the family picks. State school, independent school, doesn't matter. The funding travels with the student. And here's the part that stops people cold. In Sweden, private companies can run schools, take public money, and turn a profit doing it. A country famous worldwide for its generous welfare state built one of the most market-driven school systems on Earth. The logic was straightforward. Let schools compete for students. Good schools attract families and grow. Bad schools lose students and close. Competition does the work that bureaucracy couldn't. Supporters argue it broke a lazy monopoly, gave families real choice, and forced schools to actually care whether students wanted to be there. Critics argue it went badly wrong. They point to great inflation since a school competing for customers has every reason to hand out generous marks, and to growing segregation as engaged families cluster in some schools and everyone else gets left behind. Sweden ran the experiment the rest of the world only argues about. Decades later, people are still fighting over what the results actually mean. Before we go further, if you are enjoying this, hit subscribe. I put out a new one of these every week, and there are a lot more countries to get through. Now to Denmark, and possibly the strangest, most wonderful institution on this entire list. Imagine you're 15, and your country offers you the chance to leave home for a year. Not for punishment, not because anything went wrong, just because. It's called efterskole, and it's a Danish thing that barely exists anywhere else. Teenagers spend a year, sometimes two, at a boarding school where they live, eat, study, and hang out together. And here's the crucial part. It's completely optional, and thousands of Danish teenagers choose it every single year. But it's what happens there that makes it remarkable. Yes, there are academics, there are also schools built around music, sports, theater, design, outdoor life. The stated purpose isn't cramming for an exam. It's something Danes take genuinely seriously. Learning how to live with other people, figuring out who you are, growing up a little, on purpose, with supervision. Think about how radical that is. At exactly the age when most education systems start turning the screws, ramping up testing, sorting kids into tracks, Denmark offers a year to just become a person. Supporters say those students come back more mature, more independent, and clearer about what they actually want, and that the year pays for itself many times over. Critics ask the obvious question. Is a year away from formal academics a year lost in a world where everyone else is grinding? Denmark looked at the teenage years, the messiest, most confusing stretch of anyone's life, and decided that stretch deserved a school of its own. Now for a comeback story. Poland, home to what might be the most dramatic education turnaround anyone has ever documented. Rewind to the year 2000. Poland takes the international PISA test for the first time, and the results are bleak. Below the OECD average in reading. Nothing about it suggests a country on the verge of anything. Then something remarkable happened. Poland had launched a huge structural reform in 1999. The old system tracked kids into vocational schools early, sorting them before they'd really had a chance. The reform delayed that. It added a new stage of general schooling for everyone, so students who would have been shunted into a narrow vocational track got another year of the full curriculum alongside everybody else. The results were extraordinary. By 2006, Poland wasn't just at the OECD average, it was above it, ranking among the top countries in the world in reading. And the researchers who dug into it found the gains came overwhelmingly from exactly the students the reform was designed to help. The ones who, under the old system, would have been tracked out early. Give those kids one more year of real education, and their scores rose by an amount economists describe in language they usually reserve for statistical errors. Poland proved something huge. National education outcomes are not destiny. You can actually change them deliberately within a decade. And then in 2017, Poland reversed the reform and brought back the old structure. Politics, not evidence, drove the decision. So the country that ran the most successful education experiment of its generation decided 18 years later to undo it. Supporters of the reversal argued the old system was simpler and more familiar. Critics called it one of the strangest policy own goals in modern European education. Poland showed the world what works, then stopped doing it. Now to Vietnam, and the single biggest anomaly in global education. This one genuinely breaks the model. Here's the setup. There's a well-established pattern in education. Richer countries score better on international tests. Money buys teachers, buildings, materials, time. It's not a perfect rule, but it holds up remarkably well. Then Vietnam took the PISA test. When Vietnam first participated in 2012, it was the poorest or second poorest country taking part, and it outperformed every other developing country, not narrowly, decisively. It also beat a long list of far wealthier nations. On average math scores, Vietnamese 15-year-olds were performing comparably to or better than students in some of the richest economies on the planet. And it kept happening in 2012, in 2015, in 2018. Researchers did not like this, so they attacked it. Maybe Vietnam's sample was skewed, since plenty of Vietnamese teenagers weren't in school and wouldn't be tested. So economists corrected for that. Vietnam remained a massive outlier. Maybe Vietnamese students were just unusually motivated test takers, coached hard for the exam. Studies concluded that could explain only part of it, at most. Maybe it was teacher ratios, spending, family background. When researchers ran the numbers, those standard variables explained remarkably little of the gap, which leaves an uncomfortable, fascinating conclusion. Vietnam is genuinely doing something right, and nobody can fully account for it. The leading explanations point toward culture, discipline, and how seriously teaching is taken, forces that don't fit neatly into a spreadsheet. Supporters see proof that poverty is not a life sentence for a school system. Critics note that PISA measures a narrow slice of what education is for, and that Vietnam faces real challenges beyond the test. Fair enough, but the anomaly stands. The poorest kid in the room kept beating everyone, and the smartest people studying education still can't fully explain how. Now to New Zealand, where a school system did something most systems never even attempt. It brought a language back from the edge of extinction. For much of the 20th century, Te Reo Maori, the language of New Zealand's indigenous people, was in serious trouble. Generations of Maori children had been schooled in English, and often punished for speaking their own language at school. Predictably, by the 1970s, the language was fading. Fewer fluent speakers, fewer children learning it at home, the trajectory pointed one direction only. So Maori communities did something about it, and they started with the smallest people they had. They built kohanga reo, language nests, preschools where the very youngest children were surrounded by Te Reo Maori spoken by elders and family, all day, from the start. The idea was simple and quietly brilliant. If you want to save a language, don't start with textbooks. Start with toddlers. Then those children needed somewhere to go next. So came Kura Kaupapa Maori, primary schools teaching entirely through the Maori language and worldview. An entire parallel education pathway built largely from the ground up by communities who refused to let go. It worked. Not perfectly and not without an ongoing fight, but a language that was sliding toward silence is now spoken by a new generation. Te Reo Maori is an official language of New Zealand, and it's woven into national life in a way that would have seemed fantastical 50 years ago. Supporters call it one of the great language revival stories on Earth, and a model that indigenous communities worldwide have studied closely. Critics raise practical worries about resourcing, teacher shortages, and how these schools connect to the wider system. But look at what actually happened here. Ordinary families decided a school system could be used not just to teach children, but to rescue something a country had nearly destroyed. And they were right. Now to the United Arab Emirates, and a question no other country has tested this directly. What happens if you have enormous wealth and try to buy a world-class education system? Because that is essentially what the UAE set out to do. In a matter of decades, a country transformed by oil money built schools, universities, and infrastructure at astonishing speed. And it didn't just build, it imported. Branch campuses of foreign universities, international curricula, teachers recruited from around the world. Here's what makes the UAE genuinely unusual. In a country like Dubai, a huge share of school children attend private schools, and those schools teach a bewildering variety of curricula. British, American, Indian, international baccalaureate. Others besides. Children living in the same city, sometimes on the same street, can be educated in entirely different national systems at the same time. It's less an education system than an education marketplace, assembled from parts sourced globally. Supporters point to what's been achieved in an extraordinarily short time. A country that had very little formal schooling within living memory now hosts world-ranked institutions and draws students internationally. That's a real accomplishment, and it happened fast. Critics raise the harder question. Can you actually buy an education system or only rent one? Imported curricula and imported teachers can produce excellent schools without necessarily producing a system that's rooted, self-sustaining, and its own. There are also persistent questions about who this system serves well in a country where most residents are expatriates. The UAE is running a live experiment on whether money can shortcut something every other country needed generations to grow. We don't have the answer yet, but we're watching it happen. For our last stop, Switzerland, where the most successful thing about the education system is the part most countries would consider failure. Here's the number that stops people. After compulsory school ends, around 2/3 of Swiss teenagers do not head toward university. They go into apprenticeships. In most of the world, that sentence reads as a crisis. 2/3 of the country's teenagers skipping the academic route? Somewhere, an education minister is drafting an emergency plan. Not in Switzerland. There, it's the system working exactly as designed. Swiss apprentices, starting around age 15, typically spend 3 or 4 days a week working inside an actual company and 1 or 2 days in a vocational school. Real work, real colleagues, real responsibility, alongside genuine classroom instruction. Over 200 different professions are available, ranging far beyond the trades into engineering, IT, healthcare, finance, hospitality. And crucially, this isn't a dead end. Apprentices can carry on to universities of applied sciences or work their way toward an academic university. But the deepest thing about the Swiss system isn't structural. It's cultural. In Switzerland, the apprenticeship path carries genuine prestige. Companies compete for good apprentices. Employers, including at the highest levels, describe the vocational system as central to how the entire economy functions. It isn't the consolation prize for kids who couldn't hack it academically. It's a legitimate route that ambitious people actively choose. Supporters point to the outcome: low youth unemployment, a workforce trained in skills employers actually need, and teenagers who reach adulthood knowing how to do something valuable. Critics circle back to the familiar concern. The choice comes early, at 15, and switching tracks later, while possible, takes effort. Switzerland pulled off something almost every other country has failed at. It didn't just build a vocational system, it made one that people want.